Good afternoon. My name is Ann Phelan from the Transition Center at Perkins School for the Blind. Thank you all so much for joining us for our last session in our summer series on guardianship. And I would like to reintroduce Dr. Heather Connor from the Center for Guardianship Excellence, who will be presenting today. And we see some frequent visitors to our event, so thank you for that. And for any newcomers, you're very welcome. And for my colleagues and professionals who have also joined, that's just really profound gratitude for your presence. So without further ado, Heather, I'll turn it over to you. Thank you so much for being here today.
Thanks for having me. Hi, everybody. My name is Heather Connors. I'm the Executive Director of the Center for Guardianship Excellence, where we do research and training for guardians. We do a lot of work with family guardians, with people who are going through the transition from being a parent to being a parent who is a guardian. And so we would like to talk a little bit about what it is like to become a guardian. And what's expected of you and how your role changes. So this is going to be, like Anne said, the fourth session in your transitional discussion. And I think this one might be the most hands-on. So I am going to be offering you a couple of resources to think about, as well as some tools that you might be able to use. So I'm going to put my video on hidden, so you can actually focus on the slides. I think this is the most important quote that you're going to get out of this training. And it says on the screen, effective guardians make decisions that include what is important for the individual, as well as what is important to the individual. And that's really what we're going to be looking at today. It's not necessarily just about what is in the person's best interest. It's about how the person feels, what the person values, what the person wants and cares about. That is really what you're doing. So as a guardian, you are an advocate. And I know that as a parent, you're an advocate too. You have, especially if you have a child who has a disability and you've had to fight all along the way to get that child what they need. You know what it's like to be an advocate. Now your role changes just a little bit because you don't get to be the boss anymore. You have to be the voice of your child, the voice of your client. And that's really what is going to happen as the guardian. So just to kind of give you a little bit of a refresher, I know some of you have been in the other sessions, and this one is the first for some of others of you. A guardian is either one or more court-appointed individuals. So this is a very, very focused situation where the court oversees the guardianship, and specifically lays out in a guardianship decree what powers and limitations you have. This also includes how long the guardianship will last. Is it a long-term guardianship, or is it a short-term guardianship that maybe lasts 90 days or something like that? It specifies what powers the judge has given you. The guardian is expected to meet with the person on a regular basis. Now, I'm here in Massachusetts, and in Massachusetts, we do not require specific numbers of visits, but there are some states that do. So the National Guardianship Association suggests that the best practice is that you visit somebody at least once a month, if not more often. So if the person is your child, maybe you're seeing them on a more often basis. If it's a more of a kind of a client relationship, maybe it's happening once a month. But we do encourage you to have frequent contact with the individual so that you're able to see what the person needs and what they want and what they care about. You're able to get to have a relationship with that person, and that's very important. And finally, unlike your parent relationship, there is a very specific state oversight involved in guardianship. So you're going to be required to submit a care plan to the court on a yearly basis, an annual report, to let the court know what's going on in the guardianship, what changes you see needing to happen in the future, what you think is going well, what you think is not going well, and then the court can intervene if there's anything that needs to happen. I will mention to you that the rules apply to family guardians just as they do to professional guardians. So that if it's expected of a professional guardian, you're expected to know it too. I mentioned last week that in some states, training is required for guardians. It's not required in all states. So in Massachusetts, there's not required training. But we at the Center for Guardianship Excellence have lots of training available, all free of charge for people who are not looking for continuing education units. So if you're not looking for credit, you can do it free of charge. They're recorded. Many of them are available live, so you can ask questions. But if you're not available during that time, you can do a recorded class. So there's lots of ways to get guardianship education, and we do encourage you to do that. There are going to be a couple things that we really encourage you to do. And the first one is to have a person-centered guardianship. And that means that guardianship is not one size fits all. You're going to be looking at what's important for the individual and what's important to the individual. And the way you're going to do that is you're going to look, listen, and ask. So when we say that, we're going to try to figure out what needs the most attention. And this is going to be especially true at the beginning of the guardianship. If you're thinking that as a parent with one child as a client, you're going to have an easier time with person-centered guardianship, that makes sense because you know your child well and you know what they need. But I think all of us as parents can sometimes be fooled. We can sometimes assume we know what the child wants and overlook what it is that the child is really trying to say to us. So I encourage you to both look for what's going on, but really listen and dig deep. Ask those follow-up questions. And if you can't have the conversation at that time, maybe look for a time to circle back. So I had a conversation with my son yesterday. We're trying to have some healthier foods in our house. And my son said to me, "Mom, I'm really sick of this. I didn't get a say in whether we were going to start eating healthy. And I wasn't part of this decision and I don't like it." And I tried to talk to him at that time and tried to ask him for some suggestions for what we should have for meals or whatever it might be. He was really upset with me at the time and he wasn't able to have that conversation. So I've already decided that we're going to revisit it tonight, revisit the conversation and see if I can get a little bit deeper into what he's thinking. Because I want to be able to be responsive to his thoughts, because I don't want him to associate healthy eating with negative things and bad things. I want him to be happy. So don't let yourself get fooled. Go ahead, look and listen, and then make sure you ask. These are really important guardianship skills. So I mentioned before, guardianship is a relationship between two people or sometimes three people. So in this situation, we're going to introduce you to Tim and Tamara. Tim is the son and Tamara is the guardian. There's also a co-guardian, which is Tim's dad. And we'll introduce Tim's dad in a little bit. But really it is a relationship between two people who are going to listen to each other and learn from each other. The guardian is going to be the advocate now and not the boss. So let me introduce you to Tim. Tim is a 22-year-old high school graduate who lives in a group home in Massachusetts. He's been there for about a year. He loves musical theater. He loves singing and cooking, eating, volunteering with his local theater group, and he's excited to vote for the first time. So this is important to him. He was diagnosed with a mild intellectual disability and autism spectrum disorder. I always like to talk about when I'm giving an overview of a client, it's important to me both to talk about what they like, but also what their strengths are. Because so often in the disability world, we're talking about somebody's weaknesses. It's important in my world and my teaching to identify what somebody's strengths are. So Tim's strengths are that he's good at following a schedule, he's great at time management, and he works hard to complete tasks that are assigned to him. He works at a specialty store with support from a job coach. He has a life coach. and participates in program skills for banking, food prep, and ADLs. Challenges include walking, speech, reading, crossing streets, and changes in routine. I'll mention that the reason he has trouble walking is a car accident he was in when he was 12, which crushed his foot. And I'm going to get back to this later on, so this is important. Mom is the guardian. She's the co-guardian with her husband. She's a 45-year-old married mother of 3. She's an accountant. She understands deeply her son's disorder, and she really focuses on staying focused on his capabilities, not his disability. She's a little bit concerned about his new spending habits. She's a little bit concerned about the influence of his coaches and about his new friends. I think that's something that many of us parents can connect with. Oh, there's a new friend. Is this a good friend? Is this a good influence? Is this a really good choice? Is my son making a good choice here? So after having some concerns, after having spoken to Tim's providers, she petitioned for guardianship with her husband, and they were appointed plenary co-guardians last week. Plenary means full guardianship. So her guardianship is not limited. She has full powers to make decisions for her son. We talked a little bit about the ethical principles in the guardianship world, and I will let you know that these come from the National Guardianship Association. The National Guardianship Association is a trade organization for guardians across the country that provides education and really a lot of standards or performance standards for guardians to follow. And the way the standards of practice work is there are 25 standards, and they lay out what a guardian should do. We at the center where I work looked at those 25 standards and said, they're a little bit hard to follow. Gosh, other than the ABCs, trying to remember 25 or 26 of something is really hard. There's no song for this. How am I supposed to remember all 25 standards? So we broke them into categories to help you understand them better. So the categories we're focusing on are client advocacy, medical standards, business and financial standards, and standards that apply to all 3 categories. The reason this matters, so it feels like maybe this is sort of like, if I'm in a business, I care a lot about this. If I'm in a, if I'm a professional, if I'm an attorney, I care a lot about this. Why does this matter to family members? And I'm going to encourage you to turn your little brain. You don't have a little brain, you have a very big brain. Turn your brain into around a little bit into thinking about your guardianship as a new role in your life. So you're no longer the parent only. Now you are the guardian, who's also the parent. So let's look at some of these standards and how they work. Okay, let's start for a second here. We're going to start over on the all 3 categories side and talk about what it is that you're expected to do. So we'll kind of start from the right and go left. The first thing I'm going to encourage you to do is to read your decree. When the court gives you a decree that lays out what your duties are, what your obligations are, and what your expectations are, you need to read it. And I encourage you to read it before you leave the courtroom. I want you to have the opportunity to ask the judge about specifics. So for example, in our story, we know that Tamara has spoken to the judge about Tim voting. Tim has said he's excited he's going to vote. He's turning, he's 22. He's going to be voting in the first major election. It's important to him. Tamara wants to make sure that he has that right. So she's going to review his decree and see whether that right has been taken away. If it was taken away, this is her opportunity to speak up and try to limit the guardianship so that he retains that right. After you leave court, you're going to keep looking about guardianship. You're going to research guardianship. You're going to look for your state's guardianship website to find out any information that there may be. You want to know what's expected of you. And sometimes that's going to mean reading the law, which could be very overwhelming because the law is definitely in legalese. But I encourage you to read. There are often instruction sheets that the court's website has available to you on how to complete paperwork and what's expected. There might be a Bill of Rights that you have to offer to the person that you're guardian for. So the state's website is going to give you the information you need to be able to be successful in your role. If there is training required in your state, you're going to take that as soon as possible. And I want you to take it seriously. I want you to listen and I want you to pay attention. I want you to take notes. If it's a video that you're able to do, maybe you want to listen to it a second time. Don't do it while you're doing something else that's important. Do it when you have your undivided attention. There are consequences for breaking guardianship laws. And so not only do you want to do it for the best interest of the person you're guardian for, but you also want to do it to protect yourself and make sure that you understand what your role entails. I mentioned earlier that Tamara has plenary or full guardianship. That means she has the power to make every decision for Tim. However, the guardianship standards, we talked about the Bill of Rights last week, and the standards here suggest that the guardian should make as much of an effort as possible to include the person in all decisions. Guardians are expected to make sure that they talk through the decision with the person. Find out what the person's values are, find out what the person's preferences are, and try to, wherever possible, make the decision the person would make. And that means that if you need to use things like other tools, like communication tools or whatever, in order to get that person to be able to share their thoughts with you, you should make that effort to do so. Finally, confidentiality, number 20, is very important. Confidentiality may change when you become guardian. So this might mean that talking about your child, who now you're guardian for, at the dinner table with grandma and grandpa and the aunts and uncles may no longer be appropriate. I have a friend whose parents, whose father is a pastor, whose mother is very involved in the church. And my friend got divorced kind of recently and went back to his parents' church for the first time since the divorce. And people said to him, "Hey, how's Mandy? How's it going?" And he was really confused. At first, he kind of thought people were kidding. And then finally, he said to his mother, "Have you not told people that I got divorced?" And she said, "No, you told me that you wanted me to protect your privacy." And he's like, "Wow, I'm so impressed. Good for you, Mom. You did it." And I think that's a really hard thing to do is respect somebody's privacy when it feels so big and so important. But this is important as the guardian. You have the obligation to maintain strict confidentiality, and that's something you should take seriously. The other difference between when you were family and when you were a guardian is documentation. So you may or may not have been keeping notes on appointments that you've gone to with your child, or IEP meetings or other paperwork that might have happened over the course of your child's life. Now it is really important that you do that. And you can do that with software, you can do it with a notepad, whatever it is that feels comfortable to you. You don't need to force it, but it is very good to be able to keep track of this information. And that's where you can keep track of the date of the conversation. You can talk about what was discussed, how what was discussed influenced your decision, the steps you took, your conclusions, and how you arrived at the decision you made. This is going to be important because at some point the court may ask you, why you decided to do one thing versus another. And you would say, oh my golly, that was 7 months ago. I don't remember. Being able to go back to your notebook is going to be very important. Or knowing that you spoke to Dr. Jones in February. Well, how the heck are you going to remember Dr. Jones and what the doctor's name was and what the doctor said versus Dr. Smith? That's really confusing. There's a lot of doctors out there. There's a lot of information coming your way. Take notes. It's going to be very helpful to you. And if you have an interest in learning more about this, the Center for Guardianship Excellence, my organization, is offering a medical decision-making program this coming Friday. It's a 3-hour training, which will be recorded, so you'll have access to it after the training as well. And it gives you some tools on how to make a decision, what you should consider, and how to document the decision. So that can be very helpful if you're interested. That's also free. You can get to the training at, I'm gonna put the website into the chat. Here it is. Okay, I just put the link to the Guardianship Center's training in the chat. You can sign up for that, and like I said, it is free. When you are appointed guardian, especially when you're appointed permanent guardian, you have to jump right in. There are things that are expected of you and things that you need to get going on right away. And so in Massachusetts and in many other states, there's an initial care plan, an initial report that's due 60 days after the appointment. So I encourage you right the day of your appointment to get out your calendar and mark the days that your reports are due. So if it's a 60-day care plan, you're going to put that on your calendar for 60 days from the date of the appointment. Most states require an annual report, and that's going to be 12 months. So you're going to look at your calendar, put it down for 12 months. If I were you, and this is only my way of organizing myself, I would probably put a reminder in 11 months that I have a month to get that report done and get it into court so I'm not late. So that's really a good thing for you to do, is make sure that you're reporting on time to the court, because the court's going to be asking some big questions if you don't do your reports. They're going to say, are you fit to be guardian? Are you hiding something? Is there something that we need to take action on? And you certainly don't want that kind of attention. So I really encourage you to do what is expected from the court in order to keep on the role that you've taken on. Next you're going to, or next Tamara, the next thing she did after she calendared her next couple events, she sat down with her son, Tim, and explained the new rules for her new role. She really wanted to let him know what he can expect of her and what she should expect of him. So one of the things she's going to want to do is let him know that when she makes decisions, she wants to involve him in those decisions, so that she wants to hear what's going on with him. So she's going to have a conversation with him about what he can expect of her, and what it means to have a guardian. And if, like we had talked about last time, if he doesn't agree that the guardianship is appropriate, there are ways of going back to court and letting the court know and reassess the guardianship. So all of those things are really important. This is a great time to talk about the Bill of Rights. So we talked about the Bill of Rights last time. If you weren't here in that session, I know it was recorded. So being able to go through what rights you retain if you have a guardian, so that you're able to make sure that your guardian is advocating for you, your guardian is including you, that you have the opportunity to have the court hear your concerns if you have any. All of these things are really important. Tamara also looked for guardianship groups and training and networking. So one other thing that the center has that we offer is guardianship networking groups, guardianship support groups. And the support groups are specifically great for family members because they offer a completely informal, there's no syllabus, there's no plan. People come with their questions or their gripes or their concerns, and they talk to other family guardians about what they're going through. So this is a great opportunity if you are somebody who doesn't know any other guardians, which I know that's the case for lots of guardians. I don't know any other guardians. How am I supposed to find somebody to talk to about this? This is a good opportunity to come together with other guardians and speak to people who are going through it like you. Tamara chose a documentation tool, and I'm going to give you some ideas of what a documentation tool might look like. You can use a notebook, you can use a software. We have some tools that are available for free to download from our website that you might use. And then she began a list of what was important to and important for her son, so that she was able to make sure those stay front and center in everything she does. She remembers that this is going to change. So just like we had talked about last time, or I think it was the first session I did with you on supported decision making. The things that are on my mind today may be very different from what's on my mind in 6 months from now or a year from now. So she's going to continue to revisit with Tim what's important to him, what's important for him. So I'm going to ask you to think about what Tamara has done to make the guardianship person-centered, so she could focus on what was important to Tim and what was important for Tim. So are there things that she did in this first couple of weeks to really focus on what was important to Tim and what was important for Tim? And if you could pop things into the chat, that would be great for me. Can you think of anything that she did to try to figure out? Okay, so she spoke with Tim. Great. She told him that she would keep him involved in the decision making. That's excellent. So that's going to be one of the kind of guiding forces in all that she does as a guardian. Absolutely. I love it. Does anybody remember what the one thing he was really excited about doing? And then so she went to the court and made sure that he was able to continue to do? Good. She made a list of what was important 2 and 4. I think that's really, really key. Good. Voting. Okay, so so one of the things that was important to him was that he really wanted to vote, and she made sure to make sure that the court included that in his decree. So she took time to have a conversation with him. She spoke with him. All of these are excellent. So she did a lot. She looked at the care plan document to see what it means to create a care plan. She talked to him about her new role, and she talked to him about how they'd make decisions together. She plans to assess what's important to and for him. Absolutely. These are great. Thank you for responding. Okay, we're going to move over on this list of performance standards, and we're going to talk about the business and financial. And I'm sure some of you are saying, I am not an accountant. I don't need to be worried about this. But I'm going to tell you that even if you are not a professional guardian, even if you're not a guardianship business, these are important things that you need to know in order to do good guardianship. So with Tim may have never had a bank account in his name. His parents may have deposited his work checks into a family bank account and then just kind of allowed that all to be in one space. But as the guardian, the adult's income can't be deposited into a joint bank account. There needs to be a separate bank account, which is what we see number 15, no commingling of funds. This one's a tricky one. So even if you are a family, if you're a spouse, if you become guardian for your spouse, you need to open up a separate bank account. So that could be a real change from what has been done in the past, but it's definitely something that the court is expecting to see today. There are other things that you're going to want to do. So when it says no financial benefit to the guardian or the conservator, you want to make sure that there is no conflict of interest happening. So you don't want to employ your family members for any services. If Tim's uncle is paid to be his life coach, once the guardianship happens, there should probably be a new life coach selected. For guardianship businesses, for example, the guardian should not be having their nephew mow the lawn of all of their clients. There shouldn't be any benefit to the family or the guardian themselves. It should be all for the client. If anything changes, there should be a notification to the court. So if Tim wins a lawsuit or the lottery, the court should know about this so the court can ask for a plan for the revenue. The court may ask for a financial plan if there's a lot of money coming in. And then whenever possible, not only do you want to avoid a conflict of interest, you want to avoid an appearance of a conflict of interest. And that's going to be done by keeping simple but careful documentation of all of the money that is spent. Okay, so I'm going to give you another knowledge checkpoint, and this is a little bit of a tricky question. Can a guardian be given the authority to manage an adult's money without including that person in the decisions? Yes or no? Or I suppose true or false. The guardian can be given the authority to manage the money without including that person in the decision. True or false? So I told you this is a bit of a trick question. When the guardian is given plenary or full authority, the guardian actually has the authority to make the decisions without including the person. But as you know from everything I've said and from the discussion last week of the rights of the person, best practice says we should always be including the person. So yes, the guardian has the authority to do it, but the guardian shouldn't be doing it. The guardian should be including the person in making decisions whenever possible. And this tends to be where the families really get into each other, saying, I don't think you're spending this person's money the right way. I'm concerned. Families have been torn apart. This can be a problem. So wherever possible, not even wherever possible, in every situation, documentation is important. A careful accounting is going to be so important to really protect yourself from any concern. In the client advocacy standards, these may seem a little bit less concrete than the other ones because it's really hard to know what preserving dignity means. But the way we frame it is that we're treating the person as an adult. We're treating the adult as an adult. So you may want to think about the way you speak to the person. For example, you may say to your child, I'm so proud of you. I'm so proud of you. You are doing such good stuff. But that's maybe more of what a parent would say to a kid. And it may seem as though when the adult is that they're talking down to the adult or taking credit for his success. It may be better to say what you would say to a peer. You did a fantastic job. I'm so impressed with you. Other things that you might say, if you were disappointed as a parent, you might say, don't use that tone with me. And that might not be appropriate if your child is an adult. You wouldn't say that to a colleague. You probably wouldn't say it to a friend. Instead, maybe you're going to say something like, I know that tone means you're angry. Please tell me what's going on so I can help. So treating the person as an adult is going to be one of the first things you want to do in terms of client advocacy. When you're talking about safe, secure environment, that's probably something that you are really good at. That's something you've been doing all along. So Tamara makes sure that Tim lives in a group home that's clean and well managed, and where he feels comfortable. She's not set up a life for him that eliminates all risks. And we've talked about this before. We are not expected to eliminate all risks from our person's life, but we're trying to mitigate risk. We know that when people take risks, it helps them grow. It helps them learn. It helps them become adults. So allowing him to take chances and then observing how he does in those situations may help him manage risk and overcome adversity. So this is when we talk about the look, listen, and ask. This is when we're going to really observe and give feedback when we help the person to grow. And I will tell you, and I feel like I'm doing a lot of plugs, but I feel like we have a lot of resources to offer. The center does do a training on being a coach, how a guardian can be a coach for the person they're guardian for. And this really helps a person kind of learn and grow in new areas. Next, Tamara recognizes that Tim will grow and change as he ages. So this is when her observation skills are essential. She has to notice his new needs, his new beliefs, his values, his goals. Every few years, she's going to advocate for him to reach new heights if he needs her help. There are many observation tools to prompt guardians to consider the areas of life skills and strengths that an adult may need. So I'm going to offer a really helpful tool on the next slide that may be helpful for you to download and use. Oops. Ooh, I went too fast, sorry. There it goes. So she uses support as an observer and coach. She doesn't hold him down or back because she has fears. When it comes to selecting things or making decisions for Tim, Tamara makes sure to look for ways to give him freedom. We use the term in guardianship, the least restrictive alternative. And this means trying to compare all of the options and actually kind of being intentional in choosing the one that gives him the greatest independence. Living in a group home is going to be an example of maximizing his independence and finding the least restrictive alternative. She doesn't see when he goes out, when he comes home, she's not going to meet all of his friends. She's going to give him some independence. And then finally, number 7, Tamara has not sought to end the guardianship. It seems appropriate at this time. But if it seems like there are areas that Tim has grown in and he no longer needs that support, she may go back to court to limit or terminate the guardianship if the capacity is regained. Massachusetts, I mentioned last week, is working on tools in order to make this an easier process for people who are looking to limit or terminate their guardianship. That's coming out soon. I mentioned a minute ago this functional assessment tool, and I hope this will be helpful to you. I'm going to go through it in a little bit of detail. It's available on our Learning Hub. You've got a QR code that I did just check recently this morning, so I know that it works. And it will bring you to the tool itself on our Learning Hub. And I will mention, I feel like I am talking a lot about Britney Spears, but she seems to be the person that we focus on when we talk about guardianship. This was built around the time that Britney Spears was in the news. And it was in large part because although we don't know her diagnosis, we know that she was given a conservator or a guardian at the age of 27. But we don't know whether any of the areas that she needed to support in were coached. So we see there are areas, for example, around helping other people and social and personal skills, work and life skills. If those were found to be lacking in her and were part of the reason she needed a conservator, we would hope that she would have been given some coaching in order to improve those areas of her life so that she could take back her authority and her autonomy. As you look at this list here, you're going to notice that there are the word skills after the first five. And that's going to remind us that each of these can be learned. We're not born knowing how to do most of these things. So if a person has a coach to help them master the skills that they truly need to master, there are some situations in which the person will no longer need a guardian, and that's a great situation. So I'm going to ask you to start observing these skills now and never stop. Keep on doing it. Every couple months, look at it again. You're going to see improvements. You're probably also going to see declines. You're going to see new challenges that you can help the adult conquer. All of these are important goals in what you do as a guardian. The first category that we're going to be looking at are home safety and comfort skills. A lot of these have to do with activities of daily living or ADLs. And these are going to be easy to observe when the person is living with you. So when Tamara had Tim in her home, it was easy for her to observe how well he did all of these things. She could observe, she could pay attention, she could kind of notice what the bathroom looked like after he used it, that kind of thing. However, now that he's in the group home, she's going to have to ask more questions. She's going to have to do more visiting. She's going to have to, follow up with the group home staff and find out how he's doing. She's also going to want to talk to Tim about this. So it's not only asking other people, it's asking how Tim feels as though he's able to do the things that need to be done. It's important to know that not all adults need to be able to do all of these things. We all have limitations. But it's possible for people to learn and own some of these tasks. And imagine that when you do conquer a task, what this can do towards becoming independent. Imagine how accomplished a person feels when they conquer one of these tasks. In the supported decision-making discussion we had a couple of weeks ago, we talked about self-efficacy. And that is the feeling that you can manage hard things. You can do hard things. And when you get that feeling, when you conquer, we'd use the example of a road race. If you did that 5K, and you went from sitting on the couch, very sedentary, to being able to run 3 miles, you feel amazing after that. And you think, gosh, if I can do that, I can do something else. I can maybe do the 10K. And that happens with so many parts of our lives. If I'm able to do this one hard thing, it's easier for me to think of myself overcoming other barriers. So we don't know which of these Tim can do and which Tim can't do, but it's important for his guardian to know these things. If some don't apply, Tamara can skip them. She doesn't need to have everyone. But I'm going to call your attention to the sleep one at the end. So if she finds out after speaking with Tim that he has trouble sleeping or he has bad dreams, she can look for resources to try to help him, whether it's seeing his PCP or seeing a specialist or whatever it might be. And the reason I call this to your attention is there's a good chance you might not have thought about sleep if you hadn't seen it on a skills list. So I'm going to encourage you to look at other things that you might have also overlooked on this skills list and see whether there are things that need a little bit of investigation. The second group of skills is work-life skills. And these are going to be including getting yourself ready for work on your own. Transportation, how do you get there? You don't necessarily need to be able to drive in order to be successful on this. But can you get yourself to the ride? Can you get yourself to public transportation? Can you do what's expected of you? Are you able to do well and kind of exceed expectations at the places that you're working? Are you able to schedule what needs to be done? So if you have a schedule that maybe changes on a daily basis, do you know how to use a calendar? Are you able to keep track of this information? So imagine reviewing this with Tim and finding out how well he does with some of these. And maybe finding out that he's interested in learning to do the scheduling better on his own. And so maybe it's usual that somebody wakes him up in the morning and says, okay, you have 45 minutes till the bus leaves. And maybe Tim says, I want to be a little bit more independent. I'm going to get myself up on time. So he sets his watch or his phone to wake him up in the morning. He knows that he sometimes goes back to sleep for a couple of minutes, so he puts on a second timer so that he can get through that sleep, that snooze. And he's able to get himself up and out of bed and to work in time for the transportation. All of that could be great. And so I'm going to keep repeating, we all have strengths and weaknesses. Working on turning our challenges into skills makes us confident and proud. This is part of treating adults with dignity. All of us could probably use some help in some of these areas. So we have different levels of personal and social skills. Um, There are times that we seem to excel in them, and probably situations and places that we seem to excel in them, and others that we need more challenge. So being able to get assistance is definitely something helpful. Tim lives in a group home, and we can hope and expect and advocate that the group home is taking a role in making sure he is getting the support in these areas that he needs. None of us are born with healthcare and medical decision-making skills. We need to build these as we grow. And so this is going to be everything from when a child says, I have a headache, can I take something for my headache? To, boy, I think I'm really sick. I may need to go to the doctor. To, excuse me, doctor, I don't know if you're listening to me. I've said I had this problem. I've been here twice and you don't seem to be responding to me. It's a progression. And again, like I said, none of this is something we're born with. This is a set of skills that we have to develop. So we learn from other people, we learn through trial and error. For Tim, Tamara needed to observe and document his capabilities. Then she was able to figure out what she could coach him on in order to help him be as independent as possible, now and over time. Like medical decisions, financial skills aren't something that we're born knowing how to do. And so I'll give you an example. I had a client who was an elderly woman whose husband had just recently died, and we were appointed as her financial decision maker, her conservator. And she had no idea where her money was. She had no idea how much money she had. She had no idea what bills she had. Her husband had done all of these things for her. And so she really didn't have a lack of capacity because of her cognitive functioning. She had a lack of capacity because of her information, the lack of information. We were able to coach her in order to get her to be able to be fully functional and take back that skill. So being able to teach somebody to pay bills on time, to manage a budget, to spend available funds, all of these are learned skills. This is the area that we may forget to pay attention to. And this is when we focus on preferences, values, goals, dreams, and worries. We want to know what is important to the person. And that's where you are as the advocate. You're the one who says, I know it's important to my son to vote, so I'm going to do what I can to make sure that right is not taken away from him. So looking at all of these things and having continuous conversations, documenting them, so that you're able to keep track of all of these things and how they change is going to be very important. Okay. The medical decision making is going to be, some of these terms are going to be terms that you're not familiar with, but maybe these are different and new to you. Tamara and Tony have been, Tamara, mom and dad, have been making decisions for Tim for his whole life. But now it's time to encourage him to get more involved in his medical decision making. So when we look at beneficence, we're looking at doing good, and non-malevolence is not doing harm. So those are skills that they are really good at. They're always looking to do the best thing for their son. When Tim was a baby, they made decisions in his best interest. So when we think of best interest, we're thinking about what is best for this person's health. And I want you to know, and I want you to notice that not all of the decisions you make for yourself are in your best interest. You might eat ice cream for dinner one night that probably wasn't in your best interest. Maybe you had that second glass of wine that wasn't necessarily going to help you in the morning. But we make them anyway. We allow ourselves to do that. So sometimes we make decisions for somebody in their best interest when we have no other information about what they want. But best case scenario, we're making the decisions that the person does want. And this is using substituted judgment. This is when we can look at information about how they made a decision in the past, what their values are, what they've told us, in order to try to involve the person in their decisions as much as possible. When we use informed consent, we are weighing all of the options. We're considering maybe a second opinion. We're looking at the risks and benefits, and we're coming up with a decision based on the information we've been given. We can either consent or refuse medical treatment. And then finally, when we're looking for justice, we are looking for fairness. We're making sure that the person has access to resources that are fair. I'm realizing that I'm a little bit short on time, but I do want to get through this decision right here. So before becoming the legal guardians, Tamara and Tony had total autonomy as parents. They got to make all of the decisions. They could have given consent to the amputation of Tim's leg. I'd mentioned that Tim had been in a car accident when he was 12, and that they had decided that they wanted to find a way to preserve his limb because they wanted him to be able to walk more as he was older. But as a guardian, as a parent, they could have made that decision on their own. However, as a legal guardian, there are certain decisions the guardian needs court authority to make. In Massachusetts, for example, the guardian needs court authority to make extraordinary medical decisions, and these are considered to be Rogers guardianships. So when Tim began experiencing mood swings, he was diagnosed with bipolar 2 and prescribed risperidone. Risperidone is an antipsychotic medication that in Massachusetts requires additional authority from the court. So they contacted their lawyer to petition the court for a Rogers guardianship. And let me explain that. A Rogers guardianship is put in place when the decision is very, very extreme. And so those tend to be considered things like antipsychotic medications, sterilization, abortion, and sometimes amputation. A Rogers monitor is put in place, and the Rogers monitor reviews the decision on a regular basis and reports to the court on a yearly basis whether or not this is still appropriate. And then the court will, usually for 1 year, but sometimes less than a year, make a decision that the antipsychotic medication or sterilization or whatever like that can continue on. So the Rogers monitor must continue to do its reporting on a yearly basis, or else they may be removed. Sometimes the Rogers monitor is the guardian. Other times the Rogers monitor is a separate person. So if you're a family member, you may have a Rogers monitor who's a social worker or maybe an attorney, somebody who knows medications a little bit better than you. And I apologize, I'm going to move to the next slide. I'm going to skip this one. I'm going to skip this one too, and I apologize. So I want you to think about the things that were that we talked about in terms of documentation and making decisions. These are hard things for any guardian to have to do, but I don't want you to stop them from being, from allowing you to be a successful guardian. This might mean that you're going to have to work harder and ask more questions. This might mean that you're going to um, that you're going to have to be more involved in the person, and it's going to mean that the person has to be more involved in their decision making. You are not the boss, you're the advocate, and that's not really something to remember. Whenever possible, you're going to look at what's important to the person, what their values are, as well as what is important for the person, what they need in order to be safe and well. Make sure you're meeting the requirements set forth by your state. So make sure that you're doing your reporting. Make sure that you are following the rules of what a guardian can and can't do. Make sure that if you are the financial guardian, the conservator, that you are doing very careful accountings and that you're not commingling money. You make sure that you are following what the state says. Document, document, document. Make sure that when you are making a decision, you put all of the information into that documentation tool so that you're able to keep track of things. And then finally, I encourage you to participate in guardianship education networking. The more you learn, the more you grow, the better guardian you're going to be. And I do apologize that I had to skip some slides in the sake of time. They are all available to you after this presentation, so they'll all be there for you. If you have questions, my contact information is in the slides, so you can feel free to reach out. Like I said before, we have lots of opportunities for networking. We have lots of classes that you can take that are all for free, lots of tools that you can download, again, all for free. So please do stop by our website and see what can work for you and what can help you be as successful as possible. So I'm going to pass it back on over to Anne to talk about Perkins.
Thank you, Heather. We did have one question. Are there any tools to document finances?
So we have some tools for documenting what the like what the bank accounts are and things like that. As far as in accounting, the court gives you a tool on their website for what the accounting should look like. So they give you a template for what that should look like.
Great. Thank you so much. Thank you, everyone, for your questions, your participation. So much to unload, but there were 4 really dynamic, robust sessions. You all get copies of the recordings and the handouts. Janine, thank you for putting that all together. My colleague, the manager of our communications. We just really honor this conversation, and I think self-determination and the least restricted opportunities to oversee and support your children and family members or the clients that you work with is just really paramount and key. So just to kind of remind everyone, we have so many amazing resources with Heather's community at the Center for Guardianship Excellence. And I just signed up for Friday, Heather. I can't wait.
Oh, good.
And thank you for putting your contact information. Everybody could cut and paste that, please. And if you want to send Heather a little note about what you thought about things, you'll also get a survey from us. Please remember, we do have one-on-one transition consultation services that are free. And what we do is we provide consultation, empowerment, and referral. And we also have a model if people need additional supports. So definitely reach out. And the next slide, please. Thank you, Heather, for that. We have a Facebook community. We have the Perkins Transition Center, and we also have a Facebook group. So we'd love you to join there. Here's our contact information. And my email is probably the best contact, or you can just send it to transition@perkins.org. That is a great idea. Darcy asked if there are any trainings for the self-advocates. And if you are interested in how you're self-advocate, that's what we call people who represent themselves. Nate Hoover from the state of Massachusetts has a every other week seminar. Mass Advocates has a wonderful opportunity for our self-advocates to explore their self-determination, and I can help you find other information in other states. And I think that's it for Heather for slides. So Heather, thank you. I'm going to miss our sessions, but maybe we'll do it again in a different way. And thank you. I can't wait to see you Friday for our new training.
Wonderful. Thank you for having me. I really enjoyed it. And certainly my email is in the chat. If people have questions, feel free to reach out, and I hope to see you at some of our events.
I appreciate that. And Darcy, if you need to connect after, please reach out to Heather or I. That's a lot to unload, and I appreciate you being vulnerable and coming here to share that. I'm sure a lot of families have the same thoughts, and that really is a starting point right there to just honor how our self-advocates feel and to support them.
Mhm.
Thank you, everyone.